So, why are female narcissists so hard to spot? Honestly, it's because most of what they do doesn't look toxic, at least not at first. It looks like they're just being thoughtful or maybe helpful. And if you've been in it, you know how confusing that can be. You feel this slow buildup of anxiety or resentment, but when you try to explain it, it sounds like nothing. But there's one dynamic in particular, something most people completely miss, that makes female narcissists especially hard to walk away from. We'll get to that soon, but first, let's look at where it usually starts, because it's rarely obvious. In fact, it often feels like they're just being thoughtful or maybe even a little bit protective. So instead of trusting that gut feeling that something's off, you start wondering whether you're the problem. My name is Christina, and I help people recover from toxic relationships just like this, especially ones that leave you confused, questioning yourself, or wondering why no one else seemed to see it. So let's dive into that first sign. They control through concern. So this is usually the first sign, but it's also the easiest to miss. Because when someone's controlling you through care, it doesn't feel like control at all. It sounds a little something like this: I just don't think that friend is good for you. Or you seem so drained after visiting your family. You know what? Maybe you should take a break from them. Another way this can show up is I just worry about you when you go out without me. And if any of that feels familiar, like maybe you brushed it off at the time, but something about it stuck with you, I made a free quiz that can help. It's designed to help you figure out what's really keeping you stuck in these dynamics and what to focus on next. You'll find a link for that in the description. Because here's the thing: on the surface, this kind of behavior might sound supportive, but over time, it actually chips away at your independence. You start second guessing your own decisions. And without realizing it, you start living your life in a way that keeps them calm, even if it costs you peace. And what makes it worse is that you'll feel guilty for even questioning it because they're not necessarily yelling. And maybe they're not making outright demands. Maybe they're just worried. But that concern is often a mask. It's more about control, not care. And once you start adjusting your behavior to avoid upsetting them, this whole dynamic is already settled into place. So let's move on to number two. They weaponize stereotypes. So, one of the reasons female narcissists fly under the radar is because they lean into stereotypes that already exist. And they know they'll get away with more because of them. So things like she's just emotional, or maybe she's hormonal, or that's just how women are sometimes. I can't tell you how often I hear that one. And here's the thing: women do tend to be more emotionally expressive than men do, just generally speaking. And that's not even the problem. The problem is when someone uses that truth as a cover for abusive behavior. Female narcissists know that most men don't know where that line is. So they don't know what's normal and what's manipulative. So they assume the extremes are just part of the deal. And because of that, she can get away with a lot, especially in the beginning. So when she flips out over something small, makes a scene in public, or turns on the tears to get her way, people tend to shrug it off. But if you get angry or if you try to set a boundary, now you're the one who's being too aggressive or too controlling or maybe too sensitive. And now here you are doing damage control for a situation she created. It's the classic double bind because you're not allowed to name what's happening without sounding sexist. And that keeps people quiet, especially men, because you don't want to be that guy, the one who complains about his crazy ex, or the one who just can't handle a woman, even if that woman was actually abusive. So you stay silent and you try to handle it on your own. And that silence just gives her more room to spin the story her way. So moving on to number three, passive aggression is the playground. So not all abuse is loud. And I think that this is something that a lot of us miss the first time around. Sometimes the most controlling people barely raise their voice. And with female narcissists, it's not always about what they say, it's about how they say it. It's the tone, the look, maybe the pause before announcing, you know what, I'm fine. And you start learning the rules even though no one actually said them out loud. You learn what topics are safe and what topics are off limits, or what kind of day she's having based on how she closes the silverware drawer. You might also learn what will spark a cold shoulder or make her slam cabinets just a little too hard. And when you try to bring it up, it feels impossible to explain because technically she didn't do anything major, but your nervous system knows otherwise. And that's what makes this dynamic so hard to name. You're walking on eggshells, but you're not even exactly sure why. You just know that peace depends on you keeping her comfortable. And the longer it goes on, the more you adjust. Until one day you realize you're doing emotional gymnastics just to avoid setting her off, while she gets to act like nothing's wrong. And if you ever felt this way, like you couldn't quite name it, but you definitely felt it, you are not alone. Let me know in the comments if that part hits home. That kind of subtle tension is so hard to explain, but you're definitely not imagining it. So moving on to number 4, they turn empathy into a weapon. And this one's especially brutal because it works best on people who are thoughtful, kind, and emotionally intelligent. People who want to understand others. People probably like you. And at first, it feels like you're connecting, right? So she opens up about her past and about what she's been through, maybe how people have even hurt her. And you want to be there for her. So you start excusing things because of her trauma. And then you try harder. You give her more grace. And you put your own needs aside because you don't want to add to her pain. But over time, it stops being vulnerability and it starts becoming a shield for her. Because now, every time you try to talk about something that's hurt you, it gets flipped and you end up comforting her or apologizing for how your feelings made her feel. And you walk away feeling guilty for even bringing it up. So maybe you tried to say something like, hey, you know what? It really hurt me when you snapped at me in front of your friends. And somehow, 5 minutes later, you're comforting her because she had a hard week and she felt like you were attacking her. And there you are, telling yourself that you're the one who just has to be the bigger person every single time. And this one's tricky because it feels kind of like pure vulnerability and connection. But somewhere along the way, it turns into pure manipulation instead. So now moving on to number 5, they use sex, affection, or approval as currency. So, in the beginning of a romantic relationship with a female narcissist, she might be super affectionate, playful, or maybe even overly sexual. And it feels intense, but in a good way, like she's just really into you. And just to be clear, some of that is normal in the beginning. So most relationships have a honeymoon phase where things are a little more exciting and physical. And it's normal for that to slowly fade out over time. That's not the problem. The problem is when affection gets tied to control. So when she shuts down emotionally or physically, the moment you do something she doesn't like. And I'm not talking about when she just needs space or time to cool off. I'm talking about those moments where she's punishing you until you make things right, whatever that looks like for her. And it's usually not even clear what you did wrong. You just feel the coldness, like affection is something you only get when you're perfectly behaved according to her standards only. So now you're trying harder and you're saying all the right things and you're doing your best to avoid conflict. And it's not really because you want to do these things. It's because you're doing anything you can to get her back to the way she was before. Like you can hit that reset button if you just try hard enough. And really, that's what makes this so hard to spot because it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like you're just trying to fix the relationship. And this whole earn your way back into her good graces thing, it ties into something that we'll talk about soon. The way she flips the script so you're always the one apologizing, even when she's the one who crossed the line. But first, let's get into the next one, number 6. Passive aggression replaces direct communication. So with female narcissists, a lot of the manipulation isn't loud. It can be very subtle. And it can look like the silent treatment. The I'm saying I'm fine with a look that says you're definitely not fine. And if you've dealt with someone like this, you probably recognize the heavy sighs or the dramatic eye rolls, maybe the doors that get closed just a little too hard. And it's like you're being punished for something, but no one's actually telling you what you did. And what makes it even trickier is that this kind of behavior is so common that people just write it off. Like, oh, that's just how some women are. And maybe they're moody or emotional. Maybe they're just hard to read. But when it's happening constantly and you feel like you're walking on eggshells, just trying to guess what's even going on in her head, like what she's upset about, that's not normal, especially when it's happening consistently. And it's not healthy because instead of working through your problems together, you get stuck playing this emotional guessing game. And I'm going to be fully honest here. When I was younger, I used a lot more of these passive aggressive behaviors when I was upset. And maybe it was because I didn't quite have the tools to really express myself or the confidence. And there are many, many people out here who use passive aggressive behaviors. And just because they do doesn't necessarily mean that they're a narcissist. The key here is whether they're willing and able to change. Because if they're not showing signs of either of those things, honestly, it doesn't matter if they're a narcissist or not. At this point, that's their business. Your business is whether you can work on this relationship or not. And if they're not willing to change what they're doing to be more productive and healthier, then that's really all you need to know. Because when you're in this, the worst part really is that you start blaming yourself for not being able to read the room. You end up really walking on eggshells, you're tiptoeing around her moods, and you're really not giving yourself the space or the permission to just be yourself. You end up overthinking every text, every conversation, every single interaction. And so you end up so focused on managing her that you forget your own needs even exist. So moving on to number 8, they use guilt instead of rage. So not every narcissist yells. Some just shut down and make you feel like the worst person in the world for doing something completely reasonable. So maybe you told her you need some time alone after a rough day. And instead of just saying, okay, she goes quiet and pulls away. And then later that night, she hits you with, you know what, it's fine. I just didn't think you'd get tired of me so quickly. And just like that, you're apologizing. You're trying to make it up to her. Not because you actually did something wrong, but because she made you feel like you did. And that's how this all works. You try to set a boundary or say no, and suddenly you're the bad guy. Or you try to leave and now you're heartless because she's acting like you've destroyed her. Meanwhile, all along, she was slowly behind the scenes destroying you. The difference is you care. So, of course, you second guess yourself. But if every time you stand up for yourself, you end up managing her emotions instead of your own needs, something's off. That's not love, that's guilt tripping. So now moving on to number 9, overgiving as control. And this one is so easy to miss because it really doesn't look toxic. How could giving be toxic, right? And you look at her and she's doing so much and she's always putting you first. She goes out of her way to help, to support, to be there for you. And at first, probably you're grateful. It feels like she really cares. But then something changes, and you start noticing that everything she did for you comes with strings attached. You didn't ask her to rearrange her whole day, but now you owe her. And maybe she offers to take care of something for you, but later throws it in your face. And suddenly the story becomes, after everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me. So now even small choices start to feel loaded. You feel guilty for asking for space, for not being in the mood, for saying no, because she's already built this whole narrative around how much she gives and how little she gets back. And this is a reminder that we are talking about this toxic dynamic where someone is only doing things so that they can throw it in your face later. We're talking about that very transactional relationship. And this is the dynamic I mentioned earlier, the one most people miss. Because it doesn't look like control, it actually looks like care, like someone's being extra nice. And it feels like you're disappointing someone who's done nothing but give. But when someone paints themselves as the victim of their own generosity, it's really hard to push back because now you look selfish. And that's the trap. What started out looking like love or selflessness ends up being another way to control you, and with just enough guilt to keep you from saying a word. Now, on to number 10. They build a persona so no one would ever suspect them. So, here's one of the hardest parts about dealing with a female narcissist: nobody else sees it. To the outside world, she's warm and funny, maybe even admired. She shows up for people, and she does favors. She's charming at work, kind to strangers, and maybe even active in the community. And because she's built this version of herself that looks so generous and loving, no one would believe she could be manipulative behind closed doors. So when things start to break down and you try to talk about it, you end up sounding bitter or dramatic. And if you try to leave, you're the one that's seen as unstable or difficult. And she knows that. Female narcissists don't just control people, they control the narrative. And that's another thing most people miss. It's not just the manipulation behind closed doors, it's the performance in front of everyone else. That's what makes them so hard to walk away from. Because deep down, you know, the moment you leave, the story turns against you. Maybe you're too emotional, or maybe you just misunderstood. Maybe you're just mad she doesn't want you anymore. Whatever the story is, it's designed to take your credibility before you even open your mouth. And that's why so many people stay quiet, because they know no one would believe them anyway. And if you're sitting there wondering how someone like this could get in your head so deep that you started doubting your own memories or instincts, there's one more piece you need to hear. It's in the way they talk. The way they make a simple sentence feel like a punch to the gut. And I break it down in the next video right here. And I'm going to leave you with a little bit of a warning, because after you watch this video, you'll never hear these phrases in quite the same way again. But before you go, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.